Hello? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Bearing technical difficulties and it's lunchtime, we're going to start. So, my name is Eric Abbey. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, little community college outside of Detroit. We're going to be talking about distillation of sound. And we also have today Cherie Williams doing the legacy of the Diwali rhythm. Jonathan Day doing Reggae in Global Spaces, Reggae Futurists, Reggae in Global Spaces, Reggae as Source for Musical Intersection. That was a misprint. Reggae in Transition and Crossovers. And then we have David Aaron's Songs About Zion, the Impact of Repatriation Reggae on the Rastafari repatriation movement to Ethiopia. We'll start. And hopefully the technology will work as a little bit better than it did before. Can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay. All right, so this is an ongoing project looking at early dub music, and the importance of dub music and its influence on the music world frames this work. While the music itself is important, it's the culture of dub that will be discussed here. Dub music fixates on different elements that form and describe this culture. The other main point of discussion relates to the separation between dub as a product and dub as an act of the engineer. Codifying these two elements and tracing them will allow for a more definitive approach to the culture of music and dub. To define it and its surrounding elements, one of the first albums to be produced in the genre will be looked at in 3 parameters that help to define and set up the culture of dub music. The term culture is used heavily throughout history in different ways. For this work, I will be focusing on culture as discussed by Raymond Williams when he states, quote, "It is then necessary," he argued in a decisive innovation, "to speak of cultures in the plural, the specific and variable cultures of different nations and periods, but also the specific and variable cultures of social and economic groups within a nation," end quote. The parameters for the culture of dub music are specific and variable and relate to the production of the music and how the sound was constructed and deconstructed through the mixing board. Thomas Vendries discusses these elements and states, quote, "Thus dubs were primarily characterized by a rendering and even an emphasis of 3 traits of their musical material: low frequency rhythms, syncopation, and rawness," end quote. Vendris's traits are used as a starting point in analysis and are expanded to be labeled here as tonality, syncopation, and construction. The album following represents the ways that dub music formed a culture that influenced the world through these 3 elements. The importance of music and the methodology of working within the recorded track sets dub music into a culture of its own. This is not the ska or rocksteady scene that came before it. This was something different that took place within the recording studio and then was shared through the sound system directly for the people to experience. One of the important events or elements of dub as a culture is the sound system and the personal nature of the music. The intent of dub music is to be heard and felt live in the sound system with others dancing and feeling the music as the DJ spins and controls the crowd with the track. This led to the formation of a community surrounding the various sound systems, and the tracks that they could obtain determined their popularity. Even in contemporary sound systems, the concept of hearing the track live is extremely important. The other side of the development of dub lies in the ways that producers attempted to gain more money with the reuse of tracks. In this discussion, I will differentiate the 2 strains by calling tracks and albums that were primarily used to gain funding rhythms with the British or English American spelling, and the tracks that were manipulated as musical idioms, rhythms, with the patois. Let me see if this will go back for me. Nope, it's not going to work. All this technology. All right. So the other side, I just talked about that, sorry. In this discussion, I'll differentiate the 2. While the end goal is to make money on both, there is a distinct difference between the types of manipulations that occurred. In Jamaica, the culture that developed based on these strains is extremely interesting as it relates to today's music culture. Larissa Kingston Mann states, quote, "When people record music in Jamaica, they will often press the instrumental of a song on one side and the full song on the other side. When that record goes out into the world, there is an expectation that the instrumental is something that other people are going to use. Therefore, built into this material aspect of the music is the understanding that a work is not fixed and that people will interact with it," end quote. This interaction has become the source of the culture of dub, and the many ways that people interact with the track determines its longevity. The tonality of dub is one of the main elements in the formation of the track and the culture that is influenced by it. This tonality is fixated on the bass end of the audio spectrum and is created through various efforts in the studio. By focusing on the bass in the production of dub, the engineers allowed the music to influence the physical body of listeners in the dance hall. And, quote, Jamaican music has been designed to be felt as much as it is heard, to generate what Enriquez calls sonic dominance, where the bass lines beat on our chest, vibrating the flesh, playing on the bone, and resonating the genitals, end quote. This feeling of dub is through the tonality of the track and the bass, with the bass frequencies taking precedence in the song and album. Other factors influence the tone of dub culture, but the bass resonance is the most important element in the track. The second element of dub culture is syncopation. Let's see if I can get this to work. And it's not going to. There we go. Okay. And the manipulation of the higher tone instruments. The incorporation of these sounds generally was used to remind the listener of the original track. The syncopation of the rhythm originally comes from Nyabingi drumming, mento and burro music, and Jamaican blues and shuffle. This syncopation relies on the piano and guitar performing on the upbeat of the music and not the downbeat. This creates a bright and rhythmic pattern that is based on the feel of the song and not focused on the individual instrument. The syncopation of dub and Jamaican music uses the guitar and piano as rhythm instruments that align with the drum patterns. Construction is the third area of focus for the determining of dub culture. By the construction of the track of music, I intend to discuss and demonstrate what specific aspects of the track the engineer and producer have constructed. This differs from the way that the original track was recorded and performed by the musicians and creates the distinct difference in meaning of dub. Many forms of construction exist and they differ from engineer to engineer, but there are commonalities between the methods. The shared elements of the construction form the basis of dub culture and shaped its reception. These elements are based on the use of reverb and delay units, the use of natural or raw sounds in the studio, and the removal and insertion of instruments in differing ways. So we move on to look at the record for analysis today. Java, 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 recorded in 1972 and released in 1973, comes in as one of the first dub records to be released and features the Impact All-Stars, who included Earl Chinna Smith on guitar, Fully Fullwood bass, Augustus Pablo keys and melodica, Winston Wright on keyboard, Tommy McCook on saxophone, and others. Clive Chin produced the record and the engineer was Errol Thompson. The recording took place at Studio 17 above Randy's Records in Kingston. Quote, Java, 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 Java was one of the first dub albums issued in a limited pressing of 1,000 copies in 1973. Thompson keeps the bass at the top of the mix for the whole disc, shuffling in reverb-treated guitars, keyboards, horns, and the odd snatch of vocals or melodica. The track Java Dub features Augustus Pablo. We just heard a blip of it earlier today on one of the, I think, the Grime presentation, and became a huge breakthrough hit. This was the first reconstruction of hit songs into the dub format. By taking existing songs that were already hits and remixing them, Thompson and Chin allowed for the addition of Pablo and other musicians to the track. Dub music was born from this idea to reuse and repurpose the existing tracks, and Java, 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 Java does just that. Talking about tonality is oftentimes subjective in other forms of music, but with dub, the tone must focus on the lower end of the auditory spectrum. This lower end resonates and creates sensations in the body that allow dub music to connect to the person in ways that differ from other forms of music. Through the removal of the higher end instruments such as guitar and piano in places in the song, and through an equalizing technique called a high pass filter, this low end tonality appeared on record for the first time. The first track here that I'm going to play is Guiding Dub. It's A1, it's the first track on the full length album. Hopefully everything will go as planned. Guiding Dub is one of the earliest examples of manipulating a track in these ways, and has some early specifications added to it that would later be used or removed. The easiest one here is by leaving the main vocal line for the first verse and a bit of the hook. The audience has a reference to the original song. After establishing the song, the vocals are removed, and the trombone and bass carry the track forward. The guitar plays a stick lead part that matches the bass line and adds to the heaviness of the track. The piano and chorded guitar play on the upbeats throughout the original track, but in this version they are removed and added in sporadically to allow for the bass tone to carry the song. Syncopation is the way that the higher end instruments accentuate the pulse of the track and help the grounded bass tonality propel through the mix. With syncopation, the main difference in Jamaican music is that the upbeat is stressed in the guitar and piano. This allows for the guitar to accent the bass and drum line as opposed to other musical forms that act in the opposite way. While doing so, the guitar and piano form another rhythm instrument instead of leading the way in the song. The syncopation comes from the upbeat and is the distinct difference between ska, reggae, dub, and other forms of music. This is a Jamaican sound, to accent the upbeat with the higher end guitars and pianos, and to focus on the bass and drums as the lead. Especially with dub, the bass and drums take on even more prominence as the higher end syncopation is often removed from the mix or added into the mix sporadically. The next track is E.T. Special. It's the third, if this will work. It's not working. Technical problems. Play. Alright, well, E.T. Special is the third track on Java, 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 Java. Demonstrates this upbeat pattern of the guitar and allows the guitar to propel the track while the bass line rides between the upbeats. It is not the 1, 2, 3, 4 beat pattern of rock music. The guitar hits on the and of the beat, so it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. This is difficult to explain in writing, but listening to it, if we could, I apologize, you can hear the syncopation throughout the track. It's interesting that this track has the guitar consistently throughout the mix. It is not removed in places, as is often the case in dub. And therefore, the track is a good example of the syncopation that is important to dub. The guitar pattern here is also a straight upbeat with the guitar only hitting one chord on the offbeat. For construction of the track of dub is vital to the way that the audience perceives it, but also becomes extremely important to each of the engineer's style and fluctuation of the track. In looking at how a track is constructed, we can differentiate from the producers and engineers who develop their own ways of creating and manipulating it. The ways in which the higher end is removed and placed in the track is just the beginning of the forms of construction that were used. The insertion of sounds and the grounding of a track with auxiliary percussion and other natural elements also played a role in the construction of dub. In the early albums, the main use of the construction was the manipulation of the track and levels of the instruments. There were also uses of high-pass filters and other forms of delay and reverb, but the main manipulation of the track was in the removing and adding of the instruments. On Java Dub, the first track on the B side of the record that begins with a guitar line and a keyboard added on top of the mix. Then a melodical line comes in before everything, but the bass and drums are removed. The bass becomes the main melody line for the remainder of the track. The drums are placed very far back in the mix, and the guitar comes in and out of the mix throughout. Java Dub represents the way that the fader moves in dub can be heard in a mix. As the track continues, elements come in and out to push the track as the bass remains on top and solidifies the melody. The melodica line played by Augustus Pablo over the beginning of the track began his career and propelled this song into the charts. A simple line repeated twice and never heard again highlighted Pablo and started the use of the instrument as a main element of dub. Java Dub created a path for Pablo to perform with the melodica, and this carried through to many other recordings. Java demonstrates the start of the culture of dub. With tonality, syncopation, and construction, this album is one of the first lobbies into the sound of what dub would become. While these elements are not as drastically used here as in other albums that would soon be produced, they begin the discussion on how the engineer and producer frame the sound of dub. By shifting the tonality of the track to the bass frequencies, using the syncopation of the piano and guitar to insert melody, and constructing the track with fader moves, effects, and other manipulations, Clive Chin and Herman Chin Loy produced the first efforts with Errol Thompson into dub and the culture that was formed around it. While the sound systems were catering to the live audience, the engineers and producers of dub were creating different sounds within already existing tracks. This was not a focus on who was chatting over what rhythm. This was who was doing what to the musical elements of the song. Dub culture begins with this and other albums and the elements that were used to create them. There was a live element to dub tracks as they were distributed to the sound systems, but the sound of the track was the key to its success. What elements were removed and added became points of discussion for audience members and listeners, and the culture of dub began to grow. Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm being advised by our technical people. I think we did send out information about this. For people who have presentations, whether PowerPoint or otherwise, please give us on a jump drive, because the switching from computer to computer is causing the projector to become destabilized. So it's better if we use, unless clearly somebody has a presentation on a Mac and want to use that environment, but it's causing a bit of challenge for the projector.
All right, good afternoon. That's the title of my presentation. So, in the early 2000s, dancehall was going through a transitional period musically, and although it started as electronic reggae in the 1980s, by the 1990s it had taken on its own identity, developing the minimalistic production and polyrhythms it is now known for. The genre took on an even more distinct identity, with the rhythm versions or instrumentals becoming complex compositions in their own right, even as more and more songs were being recorded on each instrumental. It was amidst this that the Diwali rhythm was released in 2002. The rhythm produced many local and international hits, and aspects of the instrumental continue to be used in songs over 10 years after its initial release. So we are going to look at why this is and just the impact that the Diwali rhythm has had on dancehall music in general. So we'll be looking at briefly at elements of early 2000s dancehall, a brief description of the Diwali rhythm and how it was produced, looking a little bit more closely at popular singles on the instrumental, and then looking at how it's been used in the instrumentals of other songs. Okay, so in 2019, it's a bit difficult to decide on a very fixed definition of dancehall. So I'm going to be looking at what dancehall was in the early 2000s. So the two main elements, we have a rhythm version or the instrumental. Peter Manuel and Wayne Marshall, in their article, The Rhythm Method, describe it as an autonomous accompanimental track, typically based on an ostinato, which also includes melodic instrumentation as well as percussion. Now, over these instrumentals, you would have various dancehall artists DJing and singing over them. And while this is not necessarily the case today, there was a time when you would get one instrumental that would have up to 40 songs on the single instrumental. Okay, there we go. So this is the Diwali rhythm, the first couple seconds of the instrumental. Okay, so right away you can see that instrumental has two parts with two distinct melodies. The first one is just the and the second part is the so you have kind of a bipartite format that is going on in the instrumental. Now, the Diwali rhythm was produced by keyboardist and producer Stephen Lenky Marsden back in 1998. Now, he had already been contributing to the dancehall industry, most notably with his work on Tanto Metro and Devante's Everyone Falls in Love. And he created this particular instrumental during his travels at the time. He was kind of inspired by his journeys across South Asia, and so it inspired him to do the rhythm and release it a couple of years later. Now, 19 songs totaled were released along with the instrumental itself, and many of them did quite well locally and internationally. For instance, we had Wayne Marshall's Times Well Hard, Bounty Killer's Sufra, and Zoom J's Zoom J. Now, the Diwali rhythm, the name itself is referring to the Hindu Festival of Lights, and although there's no explicit reference of the Diwali in the rhythm itself, you can see where Lenky was trying to evoke some of the culture that surrounds the festival. So in that instrumental that we just heard, that second melody, the sample being used, sounds kind of like a sitar that you are likely to hear in that kind of music. So that's his link to the Diwali, and it's the main melodic component in the instrumental. But maybe more notably are the hand claps that you hear throughout the rhythm. So that adds an extra percussive element and an extra polyrhythmic layer to the production, and it, of course, it encourages audience participation. Now, in addition to those distinct musical elements, you can see that there are individual tracks that were noticeably distinct from each other, even while being on the same rhythm version. So based on the lyrical content or the artistic choices that the dancehall artist was making in his delivery, melodically or otherwise, you can hear it being mirrored in the rhythm itself. And it was to the point that we had the same version, but the songs were sounding very distinct from each other. kind of signaling change towards a more singles-oriented direction in dancehall music instead of just a straight rhythm version take. So I have 3 examples for that. So the first one is Elephant Man's Elephant Message.
What kind of game them girls ever this are play? We don't know what kind of picnic game that. Ring a rosy, your pocket full of cozy. Asham, I fell down. Ash it in the water, ash it in the sea. She's a man, this is the girl that dead out away. You know I'm cool, got the whole city locked. Impress the girl, but when they start rolling clutch. You know like a fucking when they see like a flash. Anything they say, it's out there. You know I'm cool, got the whole city locked.
Okay, so as you could hear, during his chanted introduction, most of the melodic aspects of the rhythms were just basically cut out completely, so we're focusing on his words and the effect of him DJing that, chanting that introduction, plus his choice, obviously, that game that we always play, ring a rosy, pocket full of posy. That kind of is evoking the whole game aspects of his original idea, and then in addition to that modification, when he comes in with his melody, me and my crew got the whole city lock, you can hear the production mirroring that melody, which is different from what we heard in the original instrumental. So next, okay. Song is obviously a love song, and so again, you hear while he's singing in the chorus, you hear that modification in the rhythm, that melody that's going, that arpeggiation going on in the background is supposed to be matching that kind of romantic feeling that he's evoking in his lyrics. So again, that's yet another take on the rhythm based on the artist's choices. Finally, probably the most popular example.
Shake that thing, miss. Can I shake that thing, miss? And I better shake that thing, yeah. Da. Jody and Rebecca, woman get busy. Just shake that booty non-stop when the beat drop. Just keep swinging it, get jiggy. Get drunk up, percolate anything you want because it's oscillating if I don't take with it. Want to see you get live on the rhythm of a ride and my lyrics are about electricity. Girl, nobody can tell you nothing because you don't know yet.
Okay, so for that one, it's where we were just matching the lyrical content in Wayne Wander's example. Now it's mirroring his artistic choices. So that introduction where he's going shake, that thing, you're hearing a dramatic staccato melody going in the background. And then when he gets into the chorus and he's doing that kind of chromatic descending scale, that scale that's going on, you can hear it in the music as well, kind of complementing him. So we have 3 different tracks and 3 different takes, but it's on the same rhythm version. Now, dancehall has had a symbiotic relationship with hip-hop from the very beginning, as we know, and as we've looked at extensively today. But you can really see its popularity growing in the US in the 1990s. You had Shabba Ranks, Patra, Buju Banton, and other artists being featured artists on remixes and having guest spots on hip-hop and R&B songs, and their own singles were also charting internationally. We also had popular dancehall song samples in hip-hop that are still being used today, such as Sister Nancy's Bam Bam, Beanie Man's Simma Simma, and Yellow Man's Zongo Zong. Now, Sean Paul's Get Busy and Wayne Wander's No Letting Go got very popular in the US as well. And it's partially because of that previous relationship that hip-hop had enjoyed with dancehall. And we can also see at the same time reggaeton was getting very popular. And those three genres are very similar, very easy to mix among each other in a set. So you can make the argument that that's why those songs perform so well internationally. However, what that doesn't take into consideration is the fact that the Diwali rhythm itself has been sampled extensively, not just in hip-hop, but in other genres outside of hip-hop. And not just a snippet here and there, like extensive sampling from the production itself is being incorporated by other producers in their music. So the obvious example is Rihanna's Pon de Replay, which is a pop song that came out in 2005. Lumidee's Oh is more hip-hop, and it was a little bit closer to the original rhythm, but those are two earlier examples. Some lesser known examples include Tiwa Savage's Without My Heart, which came out in 2014, and she's a Nigerian Afrobeat artist. So, those are the hand claps there. And then again. So you hear that very clearly. They've basically sampled it very extensively throughout the track. Now, less obvious and maybe more noteworthy is the use of the hand claps in DJ Snake and Justin Bieber's song Let Me Love You, which came out in 2016. So to start it, right here. Okay, so it's kind of faint, but you hear very distinctly that hand clap coming from the Diwali rhythm. So keep in mind, this is 2016. The initial release of the Diwali rhythm was 2002. So we're 14 years later, you have this rhythm being incorporated into instrumentals outside of a dancehall and hip-hop context, like over a decade later. So that's a testament to the longevity of the rhythm, and it shows that it has widespread appeal across fans of different popular music genres. So then, the Diwali Clapway in 2019. Why? First of all, it's a distinct musical elements in the instrumental, particularly the hand claps that we've heard in all of these examples. Then there's a distinct production styles for each single on it that kind of heralded a shift to a more singles-oriented take in dancehall. And then finally, its international reach across various popular genres. So the Diwali rhythm stands as a major achievement in dancehall, and it is a classic example of the genre in the early 2000s. That's it.
Hello, how are you all feeling? It's like, do you not find it a little bit exhausting? Like so much interesting stuff all coming at you, and you kind of like, you know, when you're tired in the seat, you want to wiggle about. You know, you need a brain equivalent for that. You swirl your brain around, get refreshed for a bit. So my name's Jonathan Day. It's really terrifically wonderful to be here. As Tim said, I'm also from inner city Birmingham in the UK. I grew up with lots of people from Jamaica. Reggae is a part of my childhood and young manhood, and I am part African, but you can't really tell it. People say the hair gives it away, I'm not sure. So I'm not a reggae musician. I grew up, as I said, in Sandwell. It is a center for reggae. I taught in a drum school for kids who were involved in the Handsworth riots. At the time of Steel Pulse, I was teaching kids to play drums. So it's kind of been part of my musical landscape growing up. And I've collaborated with lots of reggae musicians formally on commissions and also informally. Years ago, when I was studying, I did lots of musical journeys, and a lot of them were in Asia. And they produced some written work, some musicological work, musical work, just exploring places, just traveling around. And part of what that resulted in was me meeting reggae musicians, and for some reason I just got on really well with reggae musicians and started jamming and playing along. Not that I am one, but I played with lots of people in Asia who love reggae. So let me just give you a quick clip. This is from Indonesia. I was traveling there looking at kecak and barong performances. Outside of doing that, I played music with people called Kuta Cowboys, which are sort of sub-prostitute men in Bali. They're kind of bar guys. So Mushroom Squad. You can see it's pretty ersatz and derivative. It's kind of party music for bars for principally white people, in Bali, principally Australians. This next clip shows a little bit of that sort of ersatz thing going on. Hang on. There we go. This is Freddie Marley. It's not his real name. I'm not saying he's not sincere, but you can see Mushroom is the second track. And mushroom in Indonesia replaces ganja, because psychoactive mushrooms are very available. But then you get someone like Ras Muhammad from Java. This is him.
All of the massive, gather round for the wickedest sound coming from K-Town. Strictly roots and culture, we are bringing your article by directly from Jakarta, Indonesia. Selector, run it! Now hear this! Ini adalah musik reggae dari Jamaika yang dipersembahkan untuk kalian semua dan yang sudah tua sampai yang muda. You know what?
So toasting in Bahasa Indonesian, you know, for people in that place. So it's not just about tourist pleasing. It's not just good time cover bands for white tourists in the bars. There is a lot more to it than that. There was a guy I met once called Toulouse, a very short guy, not his real name again, from Sumatra. And he was chasing a dream. And I remember him playing a Tracy Chapman love song that had at that time been utterly destroyed by a terrible cover. And there was something authentic in what he did that was truly moving. You know, I was moved by what this guy did. And this is some shots of me playing with people in various places around Indonesia. And reggae was really powerful there. And then my interest got even more sort of heightened by traveling in Sri Lanka and realizing how important reggae music was to the people who played it in Sri Lanka. It's a strange thing, you know. This beach bar I'm going to show you has portraits of Lakshmi, the goddess of kind of household good fortune, next to Bob Marley. So they're unselfconsciously juxtaposing gods with pictures of Marley. You can see that they're promoting him into this very kind of open Hindu, Buddhist pantheons are very open to different faces of the deity. Like this combination here, Jesus and Buddhism, it's not a problem for them. It's very flexible. St. Thomas actually became a South Indian Hindu saint by his apparent arrival there. There's a theory that Thomas, the disciple, went there. So high up in the Sri Lankan mountains, which is the old colonial summer capital where it's cool, I got off a train and met some dreadlocked guys who were hustling for tourist work. They saw I had a guitar and they asked what I did, and we started chatting. And so I went to stay with them. And there's a guy called Rohantha Disaniake. That's him. And you can see he named his Sri Lankan mountain house Kingston. And he found a kind of Fair Isle sweater that's vaguely the right colors for Rasta music. These are really poor people, struggling to survive. But it really was their life, and his band was called Wailing Exodus. It's choosing some words and putting them together. There's his Wailing Exodus Mazda car. And they had homemade instruments. So I played guitar, which I'd got with me traveling, and also drummed on a drum kit made from a tea chest, and tom-toms from hospital x-rays, and tin plates for cymbals, which were terrible. Didn't sound like cymbals at all. The rest was okay. But they were so serious about what they did. You know, it really impressed me. And I gave him a guitar tuner because I had two, and he didn't have one. And he saw that exactly as Jah providing. You know, real sincere faith this guy has. He's since become much more widely known, and this is you might recognize the song. And there he is. All Sri Lankan musicians, or in this one. So he's worked hard on getting that vocal sound. And that's an original of his. So in what ways can we appreciate these kind of syncretic cross-cultural forms? Rohanta kind of has some things to say. He looks like a zombie there.
One thing like this, you know, I'm not only a reggae musician, I have a kind of a research, you know. I'm touring around the world and not only Sri Lanka, and I'm checking out and mixing the reggae and the world culture. So according to my experience, like, we are coming from an island. This is like island wine.
So that's his major point, is that it's because they're both islands and both warm. And for me that's interesting, but I wondered if we could perhaps nuance that a little bit. Recently my work's focused on Jung and post-Jungian ideas around cultural, imaginative and conceptual transmission through DNA. So we can demonstrate that children inherit motor skills that their grandparents or great-grandparents that they never knew had. We inherit motor skills through DNA. That's now demonstrable. And I'm using Lorenz, Samuels and Stevens for that work. I call it deep cognition. And so originally I called it the dim-lit subterranea of the ancient mind. So we heard this morning in the keynote about how these things transmit through generations and how that informs and constitutes the experience of inspiration. And I think the dream at the heart of much roots reggae is a remembered or imagined homeland. I've talked to lots of musicians, Walford Poker Tyson of Misty and Roots, a UK band, or Edward II's rhythm section. They all tried to go back to Africa. They made enough money. And it was, in all cases, actually really disastrous. The cultural difference was just too much for them. They had a bad experience and they returned. So that's not quite what's happening here, I don't think. I'm from Wales, and we have a concept there called hiraeth. This is a kind of archetypal experience. It's a longing for home, but it's a longing for the home we have lost that you can never go back to. Maybe you never even had it, but certainly you can't go back to it, but you long for it, hiraeth. And I wonder if that isn't perhaps something that's at the heart of this, that longing for a better world. Crucially, though, it's a longing that we can action. We can be positive about actioning a better world. And I think that's how come the Rasta Dream has become globalized. Because the people who are looking for it are looking for a positive model of modernity that doesn't involve militarism, capitalism, rampant capitalism, etc. How do we make a positive world that isn't so completely traditional? People talk a lot about Bob Marley. Manu Chao says that everywhere you go, people respect him. He's my teacher in simplicity. President of Amnesty International, everywhere I go, Bob Marley is the symbol of freedom. So why is that? I think it's the syncretic nature. Thank you. It draws on the ancestral experience of its composers and players, but equally is informed by musical modernity. It's not just modern, it's also ancient, but it is modern. Lloyd Bradley talks about this is just to show the syncretic roots, I won't go long into this, about the American influence on reggae. And then Bunny Wailer talks about the fact that they were doing Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions, and people have talked about that being a reason for surviving it. So I think for the dispossessed people in Jamaica, or the young people in Sri Lanka or Indonesia, or even young working class white people in 1970s England, who were also the children of the dispossessed, uprooted and exploited, there can be a dream of something like going back to Africa, even if the reality is problematic. Restoration has to be effected by embracing and bettering the culture in which people find themselves. So how can that bettering or restitution be effected? As with so much music, the ideas and doctrines and dogmas lie in the lyrics. Rasta can act as a filter, selecting aspects of culture for approval whilst rejecting others. So it can be a moral and ethical guide. Rasta lyrics can expose aspects of culture that deny or limit the rights of a member of that society. And from Marley, I don't care who the man is, my right is my right. It's my life. All I have is my life. I think in the areas I'm discussing here, they have traditions based on Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and those exercise heavy social control. The Rasta preached in Marley's songs is a cipher for a particular kind of freedom, both social and personal, that appeals to those who are disenamored with their society's traditional forms, but don't want to accept Epicurean or nihilist lifestyles. Marley became the leader of a musical assault that for a while made reggae the most influential music on the planet. More than a rock star, like Mandela, his name became a byword for a critic of the way the world is run. So to finish, reggae music in the areas and aspects of Asia I'm discussing allows an embracing of contemporary global culture without buying into its associated rampant greed, materialism and oppression. The choice of Rasta and reggae culture is informed and conditional embracing of the new, not rejecting modernity, but objecting to those aspects which are unpalatable and unacceptable. The Asian Rastas I met are countercultural advocates, kicking social norms and modes that they see as repressive. Their dress codes and speech and other aspects represent a recognizable position in both their home societies and the wider world. Asian Rastas represent and reflect a belief and hope about the way a society could and should be, a hope that is often fatigued elsewhere or exhausted. The Rastas I spoke with had a dream of a better world. So that's where I got to, and then recently I've carried it on. I'll just freestyle this rather than going through the text because of the time. In Thailand, you have a really different social situation. It doesn't have a history of color-based colonialism or slavery crime. It does have a history of social hierarchies based on class and wealth. So the musicians there are still concerned with oppression, historically class-based and contemporary wealth-based. And there was a so-called revolution a few years ago. I was there at the time. It was incredibly exciting. But it was principally those two factors fighting against each other, the historically entitled and the nouveau riche bourgeois. And now they're sadly a totalitarian regime. There's no democracy there. The musicians that I met there who were really into Rasta music, here's a picture for you to look at, are still using the same kind of idea, even in a completely different social setting. So the guy I've worked with a lot is Dr. Dapuksta. You can see that's not his picture there. You'll all recognize who that is. And in an attempt to kind of go with their own local stuff, plus their idea of what they should be doing in terms of reggae, they made bamboo mixtapes, which is incredibly complicated to do. But I thought that's fantastic, you know. It's a mixtape. This is Dr. Dapuksta himself, and you can see he's got a mixture of that traditional kind of roots reggae look, but with additions of crazy glasses. This is one of his gigs. His band's called Sticky Rice, and it really does look like Trump is having a go there, doesn't it? You know, but And this is a great picture, you know, as so often it tells us so much. You can see that he's combining some aspects of reggae and Rasta significance or, you know, signifiers with some religious signifiers from Thai culture, so that he's talking about the spirituality of it. And also this looking forward that comes from the aspects of space that he's included, the shuttle. Rather than talk about it, let me play you to finish this little clip. So I'm sorry I don't have time to play you more, but this particular gig was astonishing for me, in that they play really deep dub, and then they'll switch into Morrissey. They'll switch into something that sounds like the Police, a Keith Emerson keyboard solo, or maybe even something from Robert Wyatt that sounds like Robert Wyatt. Because for them, Rasta music, roots music, along with other forms of Western music, is all equally available to them as social critique. So what I want to end with is that actually that heritage of roots music, what Cindy Breakspear in Kevin MacDonald's film says, is bringing together the black and the white, the uptown and the downtown. Not only is that continuing by a kind of, you know, possible aping of the original forms, but it's extending into really new stuff that for me, as a jaded old musician and person who studies musician, is genuinely exciting. So that's kind of a bit of Marley's legacy carrying on. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks. Cheers.
So this can't work. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm David, and it's interesting that Jonathan, right? Was talking about songs about Africa and return and the challenge of people actually going back, whereas my research actually dealt with Rastafarians who have gone back to Ethiopia and lived there and settled. So for about 11 months, I spent time in Ethiopia working with Rastafari musicians, moved to Ethiopia from Jamaica, rest of the Caribbean, the US, England, kind of all over the world, working with these musicians in particular, to kind of see how they are integrating into Ethiopia society, navigating all the challenges of doing this, because they can't get citizenship. Even if their children are born there, they can't get citizenship. So there are some challenges, and things have changed recently. But that's kind of what my work is on. For today, I'm talking mainly about corpus, repertoire of songs that deal with repatriation to Africa. So there are a whole lot of songs that either in the title or in some part of the lyrics deal with something to do with going back to Africa. This is just some of the songs that I've been listening to the most and that are some of the most popular ones. So I'm looking at this body of songs and analyzing them as discourse, thinking about the ways that these songs, through their lyrics, through the music and everything, are conjuring up ideas of Africa and what it means to return to Africa. In addition, I'm looking at a meta-discourse, or what people are saying about these songs as well. So when I go to Ethiopia and I talk to Rastafarians there, you know, what are they saying about the songs that are talking about going to Africa, where the people who are singing them don't go to Africa, but here are these musicians who are actually in Ethiopia living. And thinking about how we can interpret some of these songs in different ways, and what it means to different people. Within the discourse analysis is always looking at power relations and how power is negotiated. What kind of power structures are negotiated through this discourse and even this meta-discourse? And also, what is produced by the discourse? You know, discourse is a productive mechanism. So what kind of realities are created, what are challenged. And so hopefully we'll get through this before the time is up. So I'm using theory of multimodal discourse analysis. And this was articulated by McKernell and Way, a whole set of scholars who are looking at different ways of thinking about discourse, not just through language, but different kinds of media. So when I'm looking at the songs, I'm not just looking at the lyrics alone. I'm trying to see what musical ideas are present in the songs as well, and how this kind of reinforces. Is that me? No, that's outside. It's outside. Okay.
No, wait. No, it's not.
Yeah, trying to listen to other aspects of the music, including album art, everything that communicates ideas about Back to Africa within the whole thing. So I'm arguing that this discourse that's produced, it challenges dominant Eurocentric ideologies by promoting positive images of Africa, situating Africa as an ideal place to live, and conjuring up this utopia, an Afrocentric type of utopia. Now, the ways that singers and musicians sometimes represent Africa, they are usually based on their own imaginations, and although challenging some problematic ideologies, sometimes they participate in othering the continent, using primitive imageries and such like. So we don't get a sense of a modern Africa always coming out through the reggae songs. And this impacts expectations of people who are moving back to Africa, or moving back to Africa. Ultimately, I want to say that, in case I don't get time to conclude properly, that the songs, though they didn't encourage persons to go to Africa necessarily based on the persons I spoke to. One of the main things that I saw it being useful in Ethiopia was that it kind of prepared Ethiopians for returnees to come. Because people in Africa have been hearing songs about Africa, so they know that the Rastafari movement is looking towards Africa. So when these people turn up on their doorstep and they're there, there's an understanding among people who are already there. Okay, we know that they love Africa, and we know that that's where they're coming. So I think that is one of the biggest things that this body of song did. And I don't think that the artists who were singing them originally had that in mind, that it could actually help people in the future to settle into Ethiopia. So drawing on some scholarship on some of these songs, sociologist Sarah Daines, who writes a lot about reggae music and construction of the African diaspora, looks at Africa, and I'm using Africa, Ethiopia as a kind of the same kind of a thing, because it's used that way in a lot of songs. So Africa is considered, or is conjured up as a spatial elsewhere. So it's a place that's just somewhere, not necessarily on the continent, but it's somewhere. It's the original center from where the diaspora was dispersed. Thanks. It's an alternative to the Western world. Sometimes singing about Africa is about imagining a place that's not Western. And it's also a temporal elsewhere. It's another time. So we might not access this Africa in this time, but in another time. And so we can go through some of the songs. And in my larger paper that I wrote this on, different songs, and just talk about how they're evoking different aspects of Africa, sort of an imagined way. So there's some songs about Zion. Zion, Rex Nettleford actually talks about this in some of his work, that Rastas who sing about Zion, it's really connected to revival ways of thinking about Zion as a place elsewhere. But using Nyabingi drums, sometimes singing Haile Selassie in some of these songs, really positions this Zion as an African place, as an African time. But I'm not going to linger on that too much. If we think of some of the artwork on the albums, this is Forward Unto Zion. So we have people walking in the wilderness, they're going to the promised land. But it's a very kind of a primitive representation. This is not the Addis Ababa, the capital of concrete. This is not the modernizing continent, the contemporary continent, right? So it conjures up this idea of Africa in the past always. Sata Masagana was a major one for the Abyssinians. They don't necessarily sing about going to Ethiopia, but they're singing there's a land far, far away, where there's no night, there's no day. So this is spatial elsewhere that's conjured up. They also use it, there's a minor mode, so they're doing it in a minor key. And Carlton Manning spoke about how they did that intentionally to get the Far East sound. So this idea of a place that's far away, kind of an oriental kind of a thing. It's not here, it's somewhere else in our imagination. And they also use Amharic, that's the language of Ethiopia in here, right? So even thinking about going against Eurocentric ideologies and not using English, but positioning an African language as something that goes against that. Andrea Hollington talks about that a lot in her work. But of course, now when you go to Ethiopia and they start singing in Amharic, it no longer is necessarily countering the dominant group, because Amharic is the dominant language in Ethiopia. And it is not spoken by it's not the first language of the majority of Ethiopians, right? So it has been thought of as an oppressing language within Ethiopia. So it's one way where, you know, in Jamaica you sing it, it's counteracting something, but in Ethiopia you're siding with the dominant group. Just showing Bob Marley's Exodus, that he used the Ethiopian celebrate to write this. So it doesn't spell anything in Ethiopia, but he's a specific thing. So even though in Exodus he doesn't really sing about Ethiopia, you can see that Ethiopia was in his mind, you know, when he's saying going to my father's land. And this is important because while I was in Ethiopia, so many people said, you know, we love the Rastas, we love the Jamaicans here, because, you know, Bob Marley always sings about Ethiopia. And I am yet to really find a song where Bob Marley explicitly says Ethiopia. Please correct me if you're wrong, I'm looking for one. But he's pointing towards Ethiopia. He talks about Haile Selassie, he talks about it, but his songs, not necessarily Ethiopia. But people have it in their minds, and that's very important. Just this last one, we spoke about Augustus Pablo and Java a bit. But another example of using Oriental tropes. So he starts the Java rhythm with this melody. It's an Algerian folk melody, and we all know it. People sing it. I remember when I was a child, there's something about Mars. On the planet Mars where the women smoke cigars, something like that. Let me just, I didn't even plug in my something. Mm-mm. So this other, looking at as a place, Ethiopia as a place that's kind of far away, somewhere kind of exotic that we're not really sure about. So, you know, a lot of people interpret these as they're looking for, they're trying to imagine a utopia. Nobody's really intending to go back there. It's an imagination. It's somewhere that's far, but somewhere that we need in our imagination now. Oh, I have one more song. Because I'm going to talk about it a little bit later too. Till I'm Laid to Rest by Buju has some lines that talks about Ethiopia. The first verse, you know, it starts off with, I'm in bondage, living is a mess. And then towards the end, you know, Ethiopia waits all prince and princess. So he's thinking of this as an anti-Western place, a place that is the opposite to Western living, trying to get out of Babylon, and Ethiopia is that. In the song, you have the Nyabingi drums, and then also you have this kind of South African choir that's going on. There's a genre called Isakatamia, started in South Africa, and it's a cappella groups. Julia Day, who's an ethnomusicologist, argued that this kind of trope of hearing these low voices underneath started when Paul Simon went to South Africa and did Graceland. You might be familiar with that. So that people use this technique to kind of index Africa as a whole, never a specific place, but just Africa as a whole. You'll hear the low at the bottom.
Seems like you have been wasted, eh? Just goes on to show. Till I'm laid to rest. Yes, always be depressed.
So just taking all these things into consideration, we're seeing Africa being created, not just in lyrics, but in the music as well. And also a place that's in the distant wherever. So I'm going to switch to what some people in Ethiopia were saying about some of these songs, and just to get a sense of how they're interpreting it. What was interesting to me was, because I thought that they would all tell me that, you know, we listen to all these songs about Africa, and that's what encouraged me to leave and come to Africa. Well, it turns out music isn't strong enough to get people to move. They might have joined the Rastafari faith and movement because of music, but the conviction to move came out of a deeper sense of spirituality. And after they started to move is when they really heard these songs, and it made more sense to them. So Alton Ricketts, and you mentioned Edward II Band, he was the drummer of Edward II in England, and he moved to Ethiopia. And he's been there for years, drumming with one of the major groups. And him say, yeah, them sing about Ethiopia, but I'm gonna see them. And that's the general feeling, always upset. Why are these people singing about Ethiopia but not coming? Especially because he's there as a musician trying to make it work. Christine Smithstone is Jamaican Canadian. She had a lot to say. They sing about Africa and repatriation, and Africa is the home and Ethiopia is the bomb, but none of them is coming because they feel that Africa has nothing to offer them and they are distracted. You can sing about it and make money, but yet you're not doing anything to help people over here. You're not even coming yourself. What's a song if it ain't gonna serve its purpose? You see what I say? You can sing all you want and be a player of instruments, but you're not making any difference if you're not showing your own words into actions. It's irritating to me because I know it's only about making a profit. So this is something that a lot of people talk about too. Why are people using Ethiopia in their songs to advance their careers and not coming and living, which is what you're supposed to do? Mark Joseph is from Barbados. He said, you know, they sing about here, they don't know what it's like. It's in their imagination. A lot of things they don't get right. Some songs get us upset or it's just funny. And he gave me the example of same Buju's song. There's a part where Buju says, only Ethiopia protect me from the cold. And Mark said, but that's how you could say that. Addis Ababa is freezing. It's really cold. And not just physically cold, but sometimes for Rastas, people are cold towards Rastas, right? So these songs kind of set up an imagination, an expectation, and when they get there, they have to kind of deal with that and create their own thing. This is the last quote. Desta Megu, she worked on she was part of the Bob Marley Foundation, working with Rita Marley. She was trying to look at it from the perspective of the people in Jamaica at the time, why they were creating these things. And basically saying that they were trying to create something out of what they had at the time. You know, we patched it together, a little piece of bantu there, a little wolof there, and then she thinks about the Abyssinian song, There Is a Land, and the word Sata Masagana. And it's not the actual word that you would use in Ethiopia. She says it's Amasaganalo. And being there, she knows the language, so she can actually say, here's what they were trying to do, but I understand why they were trying to do it. Thanks. So basically, and that's, this is it. So what I'm looking at is the different ways that we can think about these songs. To what extent do we need to do a meta-discourse analysis to kind of see how other people think through the songs, and how can we interpret the songs from the perspective of people who've actually gone there as well. We can think of the songs as imagining a place that may or may not exist, but when people actually move there, then the songs take on a different meaning altogether because people are actually there. And so it creates this other thing. So since I'm just going to show this piece of video, because Jamaicans in Ethiopia are continuing this discourse. So here is Sidney Solomon and the Imperial Majestic Band, and their song, Africa Is Our Home. They've been singing it, it's one of their popular ones, and they re-released a video because they got ID cards, so they can move around without too much persecution from police. All right, so this is continuing the discourse from within Africa, plus people who have already moved in. So that's another topic. Thanks.
Okay, thank you everybody for the presentation. I guess we'll stick with the 3-question limit, right, to keep it moving. So are there any questions? We'll open it up for conversation. Go ahead.
In regards to the last presentation from David, I'm glad you played the Sidney Salmon video because it's important to realize that there are people who, you know, musically produce music and have made, you know, efforts, strong efforts to reside in Ethiopia, you know. So the 12 tribes of Israel is a good example. So we don't want people to get the picture that all musicians you know, are not trying to action the lyrics, you know? Yeah, give thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Ms. Williams. I'm sorry I missed your paper. That was the one I really wanted to hear. But, and you may have gone over this in the presentation, but I wanted to know whether the origin of the name, Diwali rhythm, there's a theory that it may be associated with something called Qawwali. Have you heard that? Qawwali is a devotional Sufi kind of singing which is very popular in India and Pakistan. And it involves hand clapping, very rhythmic hand clapping.
No, I did not know that. Thank you for telling me. That is something that I would probably add.
Okay. We can talk about it after.
If I could contribute to that as well, because I was really interested in yours. Oh, sorry. I was really interested in it too, but towards the end I did wonder, because that rhythm is, it's also used in the Punjab a lot, in Punjabi folk music. That particular rhythm, and it's one of the ones I used to have to teach people in Handsworth, because we had a lot of Sikh people there. And so where do you draw the line between it being a rhythm? So like that, the African person, for example, you played, how do we know whether they got it from the reggae rhythm or whether they got it from the Punjabi folk music, which is, you know, there's a lot of modern bands playing Punjabi folk music. I was just curious if you had a thought on that.
As far as Tiwa Savage is concerned, if Afrobeats in general, tends to borrow from Afrobeats, from a lot of the UK music, funky house and all of that was going on, say the early 2010s, as well as dancehall and soca. There's a whole even back and forth between Kuduro and soca at the moment. So I'm not saying that there's not a possibility that there's Punjabi influence in there, but I have a feeling that that was straight because of the dancehall thing.
And definitely not the Britney Spears track. You remember the one on the
No.
aeroplane that had that Punjabi rhythm?
Dr. Neil.
I am going to invoke executive privilege to ask the last question. And this comes from one of our esteemed participants joining us remotely. Dr. Erin McLeod has a question for you, Aaron. Can you explain the disparity between the enthusiasm for the Ethiopian language as seen in a song like Sata Masagana and the lack of engagement with Amharic in Ethiopia on behalf of repatriates? She's also wondering about the general lack of engagement with the Oromo language common to the majority of people in Shashamane.
Okay, yeah, so, and she knows about this because she was there too. Yeah, so in Sata Masagana, people use some Amharic language in the song because in the 60s, 70s, there were people here teaching Amharic, so a lot of Rastafari were learning Amharic. I think they were able to learn specific phrases that would be useful to evoke Ethiopianness here. But I think taking some of those phrases and putting it in a song is one thing, but then going to Ethiopia and interacting on a daily basis is another thing. And I think that's another thing that made it very difficult for people to get there. They realized that, you know, you can't use these catchphrases. You have to actually interact with people. But also, the problem too is that the Oromo language, which is maybe there are different variations on Oromo. The Oromo ethnic group is the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. And in Shashamane, where the Rastas are, Shashamane is in the Oromo region. And part of the reasons why Oromo people are suspicious of Rastas, you know, is they don't even try to speak Oromo, the language. They side with Amharic, which is the language of Emperor Haile Selassie, who they see as an oppressor. But I don't think they really necessarily want to learn Oromo because they're more about Haile Selassie. And whatever Haile Selassie did, then they're going to do too. It's just been a bit of a problem for them interacting with Ethiopians in this spot. So language is a pretty tricky thing in general. And you still see people using some Amharic in some reggae songs sometimes. And that is a way to index Ethiopianness in a very direct and strong way. It's not the first language of the majority of Ethiopians. So there are issues there, and I mean, something to think about in the future as well. I hope that answers.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
So just as a housekeeping matter, participants, and I hope you know that you're just to be forgiving of me as the person who is the chair and having to move the conference along, right? You have to be forgiving. So because there is the break, I think, has the break arrived? Yes? Getting it together. Are they ready for? Yes? Okay, so shall we take a 5-minute break? Get your food and come back in. And we will start in 5 minutes. They're not ready yet? No, okay, so we have to wait 5 minutes for the break? All right, so we're going to have a working break, guys. Can we have the next panel begin? And then we'll have a working break where people can go and get their refreshment and come back in. So if we just do a quick change of the head table for our next panel.
Space for the new people. Thank you.
But let me just tell you that
Yes, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. No, that must have been a great trip.
Oh, yes. We'll be in London in November.
Oh, yeah. Not just the day. That's what I'm trying to do.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm asking Dr. Stephanie Alisk, Dr. William Edmonds, I believe, and Professor Larissa Mann to take their place. At the head. Yes, brother. Oh, yeah. And then they're gonna have, yeah. And they also have the HDMI port as well. Yeah, man. And you're in the morning, don't it? Yeah. That may I check, say the eye. Yeah, man. Jamaica sings Robert Burns. Yeah, man.
No, I was using PowerPoint. You, I'll come here with your log and make sure it works.
Right, yeah.
Are you using
yeah.
Keynote?
Yeah.
It seemed to be fine once you have the right adapter. The problem was that they have what is that, HDMI?
Yeah, they have an Ethernet port to this regular.
Right, when that one was in, it made trouble, but I had my own adapter and I plugged my adapter straight into that one.
Yeah, I have an adapter though for tonight.
Yeah, the white one, just plug it straight into that and it should be fine. I didn't have any trouble.
Professor Mann?
You don't have your panel yet?
No, I'm trying to usher them to the spot, you know? Greetings, brother. Great, good to see you once again. And
So I
Stephanie
tried-
is here.
She's here somewhere. We don't know where she is right this moment. I'm afraid.
And you've seen William. Ed, is it Edmond?
I don't know him. So.
Ah, okay.
But I did put my thing on. I hope it works. My USB drive. She said don't use your own laptop.
Really?
Yeah, she made an announcement. Said it was too.
So where is this the laptop? Okay, this would be the laptop of choice. I suspect. Okay. I don't know. Would you be presenting first? Let
I'm
me
last
check.
on the list. We can test it now if you want.
Really?
There's no audio in the on my thing, so it should be easy.
Okay.
It's just slides.
Right. Yeah, you are last on the list. Great. Dr. William, last name is Edmonds. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Did it show up? I don't know. I'm not a PC person, so I'm not
Ah, I see. Technology and services?
No, that shouldn't be me. Mine is July something.
Okay.
Here, put it down here. You're making me nervous.
Oh, no. You're fine. Okay, great. It's up.
Okay.
So
So,
whenever-
sound system innovation. So yeah, it should be fine though. It's just text. There's no like fancy pictures or video or anything
Right.
like that. So
Just copy that so you can have your drive back.
where did it go when you copied it?
I'm going to put it right here. So when we're ready, we just press play. There you go.
Cool. Okay. There I am.
Yeah, let me just close this box first. There you go. Okay, we're almost there. Just asking for Dr. Stephanie Alisk to make her way to the head table, please. Doc, you. Carry on. Okay, well, we're not seeing Dr. Stephanie Alisk, and time is progressing, so we want to get started. And I think she will filter in as we resume. So, 2 minutes time, the ball will get rolling. Okay? 2 minutes and counting.